What? You still here? That's really good. I think you got the potential. All right, so as I mentioned in my previous video, we have this pretty bad application, which is a test for the job. So let me show you some of the things you should be doing. So the first thing, I want to be building this whole thing using TDD practices. So technically, I can just run a ng test on the given application, and here is what I get. I mean, this happens quite often. I would say, yeah, those 90% of the times. It's like people start generating things in Angular, right? And then they start modifying the production code. They don't touch the actual testing code, which was stubbed and auto-generated for them. Sometimes it's as easy as just making sure that you have correct imports, you know. And here we go. I mean, 34%, 6 failed, 3 success. It's like this 3 is coincidental. It's because probably it's one of those components that don't do anything. So the stub works fine. And that's what I get. I mean, so what does it tell me? Well, it tells me that this guy is about 34% sure that his software works, and most of it actually doesn't work from the perspective of the single class of components, and you give it something like this to the guy, yeah? It's like, what does it tell you about your professionalism? I mean, it tells me pretty much like you're not professional. It's because, think about it. When you're like a doctor, right? Let's say you're really good in examining people, but then you don't clean your hands before you actually examine the patient. Like, you infect the patient, but you examine him very well. That's the level of professionalism we talk about. I mean, this stuff you should do, you know, you should just do it. It should be part of your work ethics. And if you make it part of your work ethics, you will be much better programmer. I mean, I really believe that we as a programmer should be super professional, because, I mean, we get tons of money to do our job, so at least do it well. I mean, so what can you do in this situation? Let's say you have some tests that you're not good in unit testing, right? Or whatever types of testing, you're not good at it. I understand, then just remove the test files. I mean, yeah, you don't need to have them there. I mean, it looks bad. It looks like you don't know what to do with tests, so you're just gonna hand in something that doesn't work. And then when some senior guy will take that component after you, he will have a lot more work to do, actually. And the very first thing we will do is to remove those tests, because it doesn't make any sense. So I will go ahead and remove them. Alright, so I've deleted some of those tests. I might have deleted one more test, actually, by accident, but they were useless anyway. We're gonna rewrite them. So yeah, I have 87.5. Of course, this is like a fake news, you know. Of course not, I'm not getting 87.5. I mean, it's only 7 out of 8, so I have many more statements in my code. Alright, but I would like to talk to you, like, what am I gonna do now next? So you might recall from the previous video that I don't really like this data service thing here. I think it's like a service, so it should be placed somewhere else. And also, when I open it, I mean, it's not looking good. I mean, it has quite a few code smells. I will tackle each one of them separately just in a bit. But I want you to know that I will be refactoring this one. And since this is a service, so the main thing it should do is to fetch things from the like a backend API. So this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna make sure it has the single responsibility, only fetching the data, and then I'm gonna get rid of some of these guys. I'm gonna also make sure it's like nicely configured, because right now it's hard-coded, and then I'm gonna move it to the right folder. So this is a thing, like, what is the right folder for it? Well, since this whole app is like a single module, normally I would like make like a library out of it or something like that, and then place all like item section in one place. But since I can think of it, and it's like really simple task, so I'm just gonna place it in like a appropriate folder. I like to call it infrastructure. But before I do it, I need to make sure that my integration testing is set up. So what is integration testing? Well, in this context here, integration testing will be a type of testing which looks like unit testing. I'm still going to use Jasmine for it, but it allows me to make calls to the backend, but not to the normal backend, ordinary backend. It's actually going to make calls to my mock backend, in which I'm going to intercept the calls and return stuff I anticipated before. I'm going to show it all in a second, but before I can do it, I need to set up my framework. So I'm going to go ahead here and I'm going to install all the stuff I need. So the first thing I really want to install in the safe dependencies, in the dev dependencies, is the Pact node. I use Pact, I love Pact. Probably there are other tools, but I haven't found anything better than Pact. So I really strongly recommend to use Pact, guys. It will make your code a lot better. And this is not about what is so great about Pact. You can read it online. Just head in, just Google Pact integration testing, and you will find. And the one I'm using is for the node, which is JavaScript, pretty much. And then I'm also want to do the Pact web. This is so the previous package allows me to create the mock servers. The Pact web allows me to connect through my Angular app or any TypeScript or JavaScript library to that server. So this is the consumer part. And then I also, because I'm using Karma, I want to install the Karma Pact. This allows me to create a mock server while I'm running my Karma setup. So it's pretty cool, actually. So now I have all the 3 packages. That's very good. Now I need to head in to the Karma conf. I open it up, and what I need to do? Well, the first thing I need to do is to make sure in my frameworks configuration, I have a Pact in there. Then the next thing, I also want to make sure that the plugin for Karma Pact is inside the plugins configuration. That will allow me to actually add things like this. So now I can create a new configuration property, which is called Pact, and in there I will create my Pact mock server configuration. So what it does. So first of all, I want to make sure that CORS is enabled. Then the port, you can set it up whatever you want, actually. Remember, there is one port per provider. So if I want to add more things, I cannot use the same port. I mean, this should be obvious. And then the consumer, this is like a agreed name of my consumer. I just call it my app, but it should be the name of the app you actually want to you're working on. And then the provider will be the backend, the service. I call it my backend, but it should be like, I don't know, whatever you wanna call your backend service. And please keep in mind that it should be independent from the environment. So if you have staging, test, and production, you don't want to create different providers for different guys. You just keep the name. So let's say I have a user service, right? So I will call it user service. I will not call it user service testing, user service staging, or whatever. So just use the name of the service that it represents. Then of course there is like a bit about the logging and where actually the packs should be stored, and then the specification too. This is pretty much standard. All right, that should be it. Now when I run my Karma, it knows about the pact, and in my tests I can actually create it. All right, so let me create that service. So I will go to the SRC app folder, and I created this infrastructure folder. This is where all my services will be. I mean, all the services related to that module. And here I have two. I call it item service because it really returns an item. So normally you would start with the failing test, but because we're refactoring, the code has been written. So I will just focus on the core functionality of what I want to achieve. So here we still have a couple of code smells. I mean, please don't try to move everything in one go. Refactoring are the very small steps you want to execute one after another in order to get it to work. So this is like the main course here. I want to get the item service that will return a list of items. That's it. So let me build a test for it. So here we go with the, for now it's just describe section. We're gonna need two things. We're gonna need the packed web and item service, the one we actually want to test. And then we want to set up the before all. And this configuration is very similar to the one we have in the karma.config, except that we don't need to specify like the consumer provider here. But generally we just tell, yeah, this will be the course thing. Then it will have a port 8100 and the logs and the specification too. So pretty much like we set up a client to connect to the mock server. Then, because this is before all, so it should happen before all the tests are running, we also need to shut it down. So this is why we have after all method. And then we have 2 callbacks, one for the success, one for not success. It's pretty much what you have to do in every single test. And then we want to set up our testing module, test bed. So this is pretty standard. So you see what's happening, right? I don't create like the, fake backend or whatever. I actually create what I would create normally. So if you want to put your item service in like a module, then you would just import that module. So you want to have all the dependencies like HTTP client module and whatnot. All right. The next thing I want to do is to actually test it. So in order to test it, I need to create first an interaction. So that provider that I've set up here allows me to create interaction. Interaction is just an API that can, I can execute a method called add interaction, and that will contact with the backend mock service, and it will send a request and a response to it. So here we go. There is something called the provider state. I'm not going to go too much into detail. This is a slightly more advanced topic, but it's just like a precondition of your setup. So you want to say like, given there are some items. And then this is the human readable, nicely to browse through all your contracts in the cloud. So upon receiving request to get items, and then we want to have the request. So this will be the GET request. You can see it clearly here. It's a GET request to this route. And notice, I didn't provide the normal 3000. For now, I hard-coded to the mock server. I'm going to change it later. But this and this configuration has to be in sync. And then it will say to the path of items, what I want to do is I also want to create a response. So whenever this request comes in, I want to respond with 200. And then I want to provide the body. So I will go ahead and get the body from actual backend right now. I will just store it in the variable for now. So the response will be looking like this. So there is like a set of items that has a parent information in it. So I have ID, title, and the parent ID. All right. So after that, I will just put it in the body of the response. So when that request comes in, that will be responded. And actually, you can even test it in your Postman or whatever tool you're using, even in a browser. Okay, and then we want to have the then. It's based on the promises. I know in Angular we love observables, but like most of the other world don't use RxJS and observables. So this is how it is. So we want to say, okay, when that interaction finishes, we want to execute the get items from our service, right? This method, and because it returns an observable, we need to subscribe to it. And if we subscribe to it, what do we test? So we can test, for example, that the items that come from it, the length of it is the same as the response length, because you see it's just an array of objects. So this is like the very simplest test. And then I also want to make sure the provider gets verified. So this is really a test because the provider has its own means to actually check that, the request came in the right format, the response is returning this. So I don't want to test for like status 200. That's already tested for me in the provider. So I just want to keep one simple expect just for sanity, but really the whole thing is happening inside the provider. Then I also want to make sure that I remove the interactions, is because I might want to test a happy path and unhappy path on those requests. So maybe I want to test when it returns one item, or maybe when it returns 2 items. So this is why I want to keep it like removing the interactions all the time. And I also want to call the done on it. Yeah. Sorry, some debugging code. That should work. Let me run it. Yeah, sure enough, it works. Just so you know, I want to test if the remove interaction works as well, because you know sometimes you have this bug that yeah, it's pretty much fine. So sometimes you have this bug that you know interactions were not removed, and when you want to call it multiple times, the provider will respond saying, "We already have an interaction like this." You cannot have more than one interaction of the same type. So if you want to test multiple requests to single endpoint, you want to make sure you always remove those interactions. So that is a passing test.